If you think about most of the products in your life, they're actually not personalized, but you're beginning to see them, whether it's what you do in your sneakers, it's the fit in your apparel, it's what you put in your home. We're moving from kind of true mass to kind of smaller, more bespoke kind of personalization. But when you actually think about the next 10 years, every product in your life will be uniquely personalized or customized in our view. And we believe that we're at the center of that.
Welcome to Behind the Numbers Brand Anatomy, an all-new eMarketer podcast that looks under the hood of your favorite brands, made possible by Mountain. It's February 23rd, and I'm your host, Jeremy Goldman, Director of Insider Intelligence's Marketing and Commerce Briefings. And this is the show that gets inside brands and dives deep into one of their recent campaigns or discusses the ROI behind a new technology they've adopted. Today, we're talking with Jim Hilt, President of Shutterfly. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. Super excited to be here.
I am even more excited than you, but here's what we have on deck for you today. First, a speed intro where we get to know our guests in 100 seconds or less. Then, tell me what you really think, where yours truly and this week's guest discuss a few stories and themes in the news that will be highly relevant to marketers. And then we jump into this week's case study, how Shutterfly looks to empower creators and inspire creativity. All right, Jim, time for your speed intro, where we get to know you and see how you think on your feet. 100 seconds on the clock. Our producer, Victoria, will be timing you. You ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. Your time starts now. First off, what's your core mission at Shutterfly?
Our core mission is to make life's experiences unforgettable. Whether it's through photos, it's the work that we do with creators across a variety of our brands, or what we do with families every day in our Life Touch business. Shutterfly is very much designed to make all of your experiences in life unforgettable.
How different were you in college than you are today?
I actually do my homework. I typically am probably a little more focused than I was in college, and by far, I'm more responsible.
Academy Awards coming up. Anything in particular you're rooting for?
Oh, God, help me, no.
What do you think is your strangest quirk personally?
I love to get up super, super early in the morning because it's really quiet, and I love to stay up super, super late, which makes it a little bit difficult for all of the people in my life to know exactly where I am and when. Okay,
for your greatest arch enemy in the world, what would they say that they don't like about you?
That I cannot ever keep my face from expressing exactly how I feel at any given point in time. And so it means you always know what I'm thinking, which is terrible if you're playing poker.
Join the club. Favorite Winter Olympic event?
Men's figure skating.
What is something that you've learned in the past year?
That you were never too old to keep learning or be humbled when you are driving a lot of transformation at work.
And if you could change your first name to anything that was not Jim, what would it be?
My mother calls me James Anthony, and so that's probably about as good as I would get.
Okay, love that. You successfully got through the whole entire speed round, and now we're on to substantive stuff. Now it's time for Tell Me What You Really Think. This is a new segment where I pick one or two stories in the news that will be highly relevant to brand marketers and get our guests' perspective. So first off, I wanted to ask you about the Super Bowl. No judgment. I'm not a big football fan. Do you happen to be a big football fan at all or no?
We watch football pretty regularly. We did watch the Super Bowl, but we didn't have a real team in the hunt.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because obviously there was something at like 56% or so of all households watched some of the Super Bowl. And, as we were covering this story for Insider Intelligence, that the cost jumped for a 30-second spot to $7 million. And I believe it wound up being about 6.6 cents to reach each individual viewer. So to some extent, you get some value out of that. But what do you think? I mean, is Super Bowl ad spending, is it overblown? Is there validity in trying to reach as many people at the same time?
Look, I think if you execute some really interesting messages or really good creative and it breaks through, you garner both the in-moment attention, but frankly, you get all of the attention after. I mean, let's just call it out. Coinbase kind of crushed it this year. They both took a really inexpensive way to do it. They leveraged some really cool approaches to it. You got a ton of people talking about it. So you get kind of the in moment, you get the reinforcement of what you're doing. And frankly, you get a lot of talk about it afterwards. I mean, we're sitting here talking about it now. So if you land the creative and you land the messaging, I think really well. I think the big challenge for marketers is a lot of breakthrough messaging isn't the most overproduced. It's not the most expensive. It's oftentimes, very much aligned to the work that you do. So in the end, I think it's about how you execute when you actually do it.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think, like you mentioned, the Coinbase example, to me, one of the things that's so key is there are certain products that are going to be, geared towards the masses. And then there are certain things that just aren't going to be and don't have to be, so that's the reason why you don't see a lot of B2B companies in the Super Bowl, right? Because you're trying to do something that is, niche to an extent. But it did kind of strike me that there are all of these crypto brands that are, trying to go mainstream and talk to everybody all of a sudden.
I think it's part of the conversation that's happening right now, which is actually really relevant, which is you have something that is tapping into both innovation, it taps into money and finance, which consumers actually do understand. There's a little bit of ambiguity or controversy about it, right? Which inherently makes it a little bit interesting. And it leads you to have to stop and step back. So if you're super plugged in to kind of crypto and Bitcoin and what's happening in that space, it's going to resonate and land really well. And it's cool and it's in the right space. But if you're a consumer who is sitting there saying, I don't understand it, I've heard about it, I don't get why it's such a big deal, I actually would, potentially argue that as well is really good because it triggers that consumer to be like, okay, if this is in the Super Bowl, I should probably go figure it out, or I should go check it out, or I should go look at it. Both of those audiences are super relevant to a lot of those brands.
And then on top of that, I think, everything old is new again. Like I saw a lot of travel this year. That was one thing that we noted that was really interesting is, all of a sudden you've got folks like Expedia and Booking.com that say, you know what, I actually think that people are going to go back to travel. We thought it was going to happen in 2021. Oh, well, we were wrong, but maybe 2022 is the place that we, have high hopes for.
I think what you're really trying to do is both tap into an audience that clearly is an experiential audience, right? If you're watching sporting events or you're doing kind of anything that's socially like very big, whether it's the Olympics or it's what's happening, with the Super Bowl, these are people who are wanting to do something, right? And they're kind of not sitting in the sidelines, literally and figuratively. And so travel, I think, is always, frankly, going to make sense, whether it was last year when it probably was a bit early. We spend a lot of time at Shutterfly talking about travel because a huge part of our business, stems off of people taking photos about trips that they take. And we certainly, think that there's a big opportunity for it to rebound in 22. And so in the end, I think it makes sense to use the Super Bowl as a big place to go do that.
It's almost like that's why I wanted to talk to you about this topic. Yeah, no, absolutely. And another thing and another story that we published recently that I thought was really interesting is that there's been a lot of talk about these creator payment programs that come from major social platforms like TikTok and Instagram. And I think it's obviously really interesting and relevant because, of course, you are part of the creator economy, to some extent by, with respect to like what you do, like at your core is, you're working with creators, you're empowering them. That's the way that I see it at the very least. But I was curious, from your perspective, do you feel that social media and these creator payment programs are an opportunity to help creators grow and fund themselves, or are they something that, I don't want to say is a pipe dream, but, are there better ways for creators to monetize their audiences?
I think the huge respect I have for individual creators who are out there, putting together content, creating messages, making products like they do with brands like ours at Shutterfly. The respect is that they actually are typically quite creative, literally, about how they make money, right? And the various avenues that they do it. So in general, I think that when brands and companies are trying to be supportive, I would say that whether it's tools or it's economic incentive or it's tapping into demand generating capabilities that we can enable creators with, I think all of them are part of the mix, right? Now, if you think that the creator kind of payment kind of incentive programs that some of the bigger platforms are putting in play are going to be the core source of creator income. I think that's where it begins to fall apart. I think that they are additional kind of incentives. They are additional ways for creators to get started, to be able to enable them to go into the various things that they're doing. But I think it's part of the overall mix. And I think that's what makes great entrepreneurs. That's why, creators are out there. They're able to look at the different avenues that they can, monetize their skills and their talent. And I think that that's what makes them pretty exceptional.
Yeah, and I think that Rachel Wolf on my team, she put it well, I think, in her initial piece on this, where she said creator funds were intended to be an incentive, not a primary revenue stream, right? So if these are things that can get people onto these platforms, great, but it's important to remember that this is not the only thing that they ought to rely on, and they're not set up that way. So I think that, everything you said definitely checks out, makes a lot of sense.
I think the range, part of what we spend a lot of time thinking about is the range of what and who a creator actually is, right? There is like the individual person who's making a photo book for their family, or they are personalizing wallpaper with our Spoonflower brand. Like that is a creator. They aren't trying to economically create value out of it. They're not necessarily trying to create a small business from it, but they're ultimately still an individual creator. All the way to truly epic creators who have created entire franchises of brands where they really have product and content and all of that together. That is the range that we're talking about. And so as we think about as brands, tools that we provide to enable that entire creative economy, there's a pretty big range of them. And I think that you have to look at each of the different elements of it as one of many different vehicles to truly monetize your creativity.
And speaking of elements, we're going to get on to another segment in a second. But first, we're going to take a quick word from our sponsor, Mountain, and then we'll be right back.
Mountain is turning connected TV into performance TV. Their marketing software solution gives advertisers everything they need to quickly and easily launch connected TV campaigns that are fully optimized to achieve specific marketing goals. From conversions and revenue to website visits and more, Mountain Performance TV is tailor-made to treat television as a performance ad channel, just like paid search and social. Visit mountain.com today to learn more and discover the impact it can have for your brand.
Alrighty, we're back. So now it's time for our Briefcase Study, where we look at a recent brand campaign or deployment and discuss what went right and some lessons for next time. But Jim, before we dive in, what are the numbers? What can you share? Give us some of the DL on how Shutterfly is doing, and feel free to share everything.
I'm certainly happy to share. Let's talk about a couple of things. One, we're a brand that serves 21 million customers. We do it, I think, incredibly well. This holiday season, we saw more than 250 million holiday cards printed. So that means half of Americans either printed or received a Shutterfly card expressing kind of holiday joy, right? Our Life Touch business is the single largest, business in the school photography space and studio photography. And so we're servicing tens of thousands of schools that literally have been really navigating COVID for students every day. And so that's been a super big part of what we've been doing. And we're super excited. We just brought a company called Spoonflower into our family of brands, and they are the leader in on-demand home decor, right? So the ability to create personalized wallpaper and fabric. And, our artists upload more than 4,000 designs every day to create new content for users to, personalize everything in their life. So, when it comes down to the numbers, those are some pretty big numbers at pretty big scale. And, it's a lot of hard work to continue to grow that.
Well, and I'm glad that you talked about personalization there, because one thing that's so interesting to me about what you do is, you've been at your core a personalization platform, the way that I kind of think about it, since before just about anyone else. And, before people were really thinking that personalization was going to be like the next big thing. And you've really been enabling everyone to some extent to be a creator. And the only flip side to that, or like the negative, is that other brands have been catching on. Other platforms are trying to do similar things. It's great to be like the king in something, but then everybody comes for you. So how do you maintain relevance now that seemingly everyone is trying to add some layer of personalization to their offerings?
I think there are two things that we get really excited about. First, the core of this business in personalization is actually the ability to manufacture personalized product at scale, right? Most manufacturers are set up to produce the same thing 100 million times. It's how you get quality, it's how you get scale of cost. We actually have designed the entire business around the ability to produce every single item in a unit of one. And that's at the core of the business differentiation. And I think that's really powerful, right? Because that is actually very hard to replicate. Then the second, to your question on relevance, the relevance is really, do you have the right products that people want to personalize? Do you have super easy to use and mobile capabilities? And frankly, do you connect them with the creator tools that are needed to make that personalization happen? So when I think about the trend over the next decade, we believe we're on the early stage of personalized products, right? If you think about most of the products in your life, they're actually not personalized. But you're beginning to see them, whether it's what you do in your sneakers, it's the fit in your apparel, it's what you put in your home. We're moving from kind of true mass to kind of smaller, more bespoke kind of personalization. But when you actually think about the next 10 years, every product in your life will be uniquely personalized or customized in our view. And we believe that we're at the center of that.
Well, and I think that kind of ties into your campaign that you were running. I believe it started, I think, the start of the holiday season or right beforehand, right? Make It a Thing. Was that right?
Yes, we launched Make It a Thing late in the fall to really kick off the holiday season. And it really is a campaign that was almost entirely built on this idea that every product in your life can be uniquely yours, and or the products that you give can also be unique to the people that you give them to, right? Which is very different than kind of mass consumption of products. And it really allows each human to be both a creator, but also someone who can express something meaningful and personal in their life. And so our campaign really tried to move Shutterfly from being known as a photo brand to a brand that really is enabling the unique expression of who you are.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me, obviously, this is part of why I wanted to talk about the Super Bowls. I know that part of that mix, and I think like a significant portion of that ad spend, correct me if I'm wrong, was on linear old school TV.
You know, it's funny as you think about what is old becomes new. I think we were talking about that earlier in the conversation. You know, it's that notion that what's happening is the distribution of the content is changing, the way people consume it. But in the end, it's still great video content. And whether it's showing up in linear TV or it's showing up in a replay that you look at, or you're seeing a clip of it actually be repurposed, all of that content is still originating with an amazing creative idea that expresses what you need as a brand, and it's delivered to the consumer when they most are ready to see it. So as an example, like I didn't see the Coinbase commercial while I was watching the Super Bowl. I saw it the next day when all of a sudden there was a lot of chatter about it. There was a lot of thinking about kind of what really broke through. And then all of a sudden you start to look at it. And those are the types of things that as marketers, right, and as business leaders that we have to think about, which is content now is going to be consumed in so many different vehicles. So you really at the core have to be really good at what is the essence of what you're trying to communicate and what's going to make it be repurposable.
Want to ask you a little bit about the way that you think about allocating money for those channels, because obviously, you know, every single brand, including yours, wants to get the best potential return on investment and based off of your objectives. How did you think about how much to allocate to, let's say, linear versus streaming? And I know you had digital partnerships and audio and social. So there's so many different factors that can go into it. So when you're trying to tell that story, how do you figure out like which channels to use and how to allocate accordingly?
I think there are a couple of things. One, we are a very data-driven and test-oriented kind of company. And in that, we have over time, I think, really worked at optimizing kind of what is the channel mix. And frankly, what is the channel mix for brand messages versus what's the channel mix for kind of just let's get in and drive sales of holiday cards. And so I think the first one is to look historically and look at the data and how do you drive testing. And all of that is kind of, I think, relevant to most modern marketers, right? In terms of how do you be a data-driven enterprise. I think there's the second piece, which is when you have a creative asset and you have a creative message, where do you think that that's going to be best delivered, right? So we, had a range of what I call there the Whitney Houston emotional moments of our brand. Like it just feels really big and really powerful. And then there are really quirky and kind of very funny moments relative to how to make it seem relevant to everybody. Those ideas creatively are distributed very differently, right? Like what's going to land. And then I think the third one is we're spending a lot more time building our own capabilities to create engagement of our existing customer base because it's big. And as we look at the landscape that's changing between Google and Amazon and Apple and that ecosystem that's impacting all of us as marketers and advertisers, I think we're spending a lot more time really looking at how we get our existing customers to come back, not because we touch them outside, but we have relevant capabilities that make them want to come back.
Yeah, it's interesting also because I noticed one thing in some of the coverage of this particular campaign that you had a strong presence on Snapchat and TikTok as part of this campaign. And, in order to reach younger consumers and creators. And to me, that either tells one of two stories. And I'm curious which one you think is more likely to be true. Is it that Shutterfly just resonates so much with younger consumers, or that Shutterfly sees that it has an opportunity to better speak to this particular demographic?
Not shocking. I'm going to kind of take both sides of it in terms of I actually value both. I think that the first is that the data is very clear for us that as younger consumers are taking more and more photos, 1.4 trillion photos were taken last year alone. It's grown exponentially over the last decade. As they take more photos, they actually are more interested in creating physical product out of those photos, but also creating physical product that's personalized. So the data says that that audience is actually very, very interested in personalized and customized product, either for photo or creative product. So it says that we've got a real group of people who care about the things that we can offer to them. The second is that we also recognize we're a brand that's in a set of brands that have been around for more than 20 years in most instances. And in that, we do have to be relevant. So the work that we've done with TikTok, the work that we've done on Snapchat is really relevant to that. I think the other work that speaks to it is we, are really moving into what our role is relative to NFTs and how we think about kind of new digital media and the way commerce is going to be conducted. And again, I think those are all examples where as a brand that's been around and as a leader in our market, we continue to innovate in our efforts to reach younger audiences.
And I'm glad that you mentioned NFTs because that was one of my last questions that I wanted to ask you. Just the very fact that you launched something, around the holidays, I think it's interesting because you think of Shutterfly as creating these physical things. And then, here you are with the digital economy to some extent, like leveraging. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about how that campaign came together.
Yeah. So what we did is we partnered with, actually, what's fascinating is we took kind of what people who've been in the space would not say is emerging anymore, but NFTs, right? And we paired it with Iris Apfel, who's like kind of a fashion kind of celebrity icon who has been around almost a century. And by bringing those two things together, one, we think that's really interesting. And two, she's always been kind of an innovative pioneer in terms of just trying to break through. And she's somewhat a little bit iconic within audiences that are actually younger than I am for sure. So we did that and we created these really unique 3 holiday cards with unique photos from Iris's life. And we turned them into NFTs and we use that to create an opportunity to kind of drive a charitable activity. And what I loved about it is, one, we saw really interesting engagement. Two, it's the right place for our brand to play, right? The core of the Shutterfly brand sits in photo, and in sitting in photo, it has really kind of has a right to live around the idea of art and digital art and the NFT space. And I think the third piece is it signals, and it's genuine, that we intend to really lead from a technology standpoint, but also understand that photo is actually just part of a creative exercise. And so the work that we've done with our creator communities and how we bring design together with photo all came together in this really interesting and super exciting campaign that we did with her over the holiday.
No, I thought it was really cool. Speaking of somebody who met her in person once, she will definitely not remember it. And I think the campaign, a lot of the things that you're doing, it is kind of fun to watch a brand that's been around for a while to continually innovate. So, and now for your parting shot, what are 2 brands, Jim, that you particularly admire that you draw inspiration from?
I am continuously thinking about the Away travel brand. And the reason I think a lot about it is because you disrupt a product category, you do it in a way that is really interesting, you lean into travel, and you still are able to make progress in terms of how you innovate kind of in and around the space. And whether it's the in-store experience, it's the product itself, it's the ability to think about partnerships and collaborations, I think there's something really interesting. Along with the fact that I think too, just as a leader, right, it is also interesting to see how founder-led companies drive transformation and change, how they deal with that work. So I think that Away is a brand that I think is really interesting just as a business person to think about in terms of how I think about the work. And then I think the other brand, that I really value and think about in terms of that inspires me is the work that comes out of Glossier. And it's somebody, having been in the fashion business for quite some time, if you go back and look at that brand and really understanding early on the power of individuals and individual creators who were influencers and really understood how to tap into personalization, it's a brand that I think, again, tapped into something early on, understood how to do it. But what I actually admire about it now, very recently, is they really did experience some challenges through COVID and how their business model is changing, and they had to make some really tough decisions. And so part of what you're hearing from me is, I think we celebrate these very fast-moving brands that are, kind of pop to the center of attention. But what I actually often like is how brands become resilient as they drive change and transformation. And then the last one that I'm going to put a huge plug in for is Camp. It is a children's and family toy company that I am in love with, right? Super experiential. The first one that they launched kind of on Fifth Avenue in the lower part of Manhattan, where you could walk behind and all of a sudden this magical world showed up, is really reinventing how families can use stores and retail experiences to be actually a family place of entertainment. So a huge fan of the Camp brand as well.
Well, that's a pretty amazing lineup. This was really, really fantastic, Jim. Thank you so much for making the time to talk to us today.
Absolutely, Jeremy. It's been a terrific time talking with you.
That's all the time we have for today's episode. Let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you at podcast@emarketer.com. I'll be back in 2 weeks for another episode of the Behind the Numbers Brand Anatomy. Make sure you tune in tomorrow for the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by Mountain.